Welcome back, listener. Tonight, we're drifting slowly through the complete timeline of Resident Evil, a sprawling saga that begins in the 1960s with three ambitious scientists discovering an ancient virus, and ends decades later with bioterrorism having reshaped the world, where corporations weaponized diseases, where viruses created monsters, where a single company's greed unleashed horrors that killed millions, where heroes fought through outbreak after outbreak, trying to stop the spread of biological weapons, where the dead rose and walked and hungered, where humanity faced not natural disaster, but man-made apocalypse, outbreak by outbreak, mutation by mutation, conspiracy by conspiracy, across decades of incidents that transformed the world. This is a complete journey through Resident Evil's timeline, from the founding of Umbrella Corporation through the fall of Raccoon City, through the age of bioterrorism, through the village and the mold and beyond. Every major incident, every significant outbreak, every key player, every virus and parasite and weapon, told chronologically so you can understand how each event connects, how the timeline flows, how one corporation's research program spiraled into global catastrophe, how the bioorganic weapons they created escaped containment repeatedly, how the desire to profit from death created death that couldn't be controlled. Whether you're discovering this timeline for the first time, letting familiar horrors guide you toward rest, or simply allowing the narrative to wash over you as consciousness fades, this will carry you through the complete history of Resident Evil's world. From progenitor virus to megamycete, from Spencer to Wesker to Miranda, from mansion to city to village, the entire sprawling, interconnected saga that spans decades and continents, told in gentle tones designed not to excite but to soothe, not to energize but to calm, paced for sleep rather than engagement, comprehensive rather than rushed, complete rather than abbreviated. Before we begin our long journey, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy these extended explorations that unfold like slow dreams. And let me know in the comments which Resident Evil game or era resonates most with you. It's always interesting to see which parts of this vast timeline connect most deeply with different listeners, which moments carry meaning, which horrors fascinate from safe distance. Let's begin this journey through biological horror, corporate conspiracy, and decades of outbreaks, understanding that the story starts not with zombies or monsters, but with three men in the 1960s, with ambition and discovery, and the moment when science became weaponized, when viruses became tools, when the path toward Raccoon City's fall was first laid by researchers who couldn't imagine what their work would unleash, who sought immortality and found only death, who opened doors that should have remained closed, who began the timeline we'll now explore, together as sleep approaches and the story unfolds across decades of horror, outbreak after outbreak, each building on what came before, each connected to the foundation laid by those first researchers discovering something ancient, something powerful, something that would eventually destroy millions. Part 1. The Foundation, Progenitor, and the Birth of Umbrella, 1966-1978. As we begin this timeline, as sleep starts to pull you deeper, let us travel back to 1966, to West Africa, to the Endapaya Kingdom region, where three men, Lord Oswell E. Spencer, Dr. James Marcus, and Dr. Edward Ashford, embarked on an expedition that would change the world, though not in ways they initially imagined, not for the better. not with the noble intentions they might have claimed, but rather beginning a chain of events that would lead to the weaponization of disease, the creation of monsters, the deaths of millions, all starting with discovery of a flower, a simple plant with extraordinary properties, the beginning of everything. The discovery of the progenitor virus, 1966. The Endopaya people had legends, stories passed down through generations, tales of a flower growing only in the sun garden, a sacred place where unique conditions created unique flora. And among those flowers was one that contained something remarkable, something that would later be called the progenitor virus, a naturally occurring pathogen that existed in this plant, that had been there for perhaps thousands of years, that the Endopaya had encountered and learned to fear, understanding instinctively what modern science would later confirm. This flower, this virus, could transform humans, could grant some extraordinary abilities while killing others, could alter the very nature of human biology in ways that seemed almost supernatural. Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford discovered this flower during their expedition, studying the Endopaya ruins, documenting their findings, collecting samples that they would bring back to their laboratories, not understanding yet what they'd found, not realizing that this virus would become the foundation for decades of bioweapons research, not imagining that their discovery would eventually kill millions, would create the biological horrors that would plague the world, would spawn the entire nightmare that Resident Evil depicts, all beginning with this moment, this discovery. 3 men finding a flower and seeing not natural wonder but potential, not beauty but utility, not something to preserve but something to exploit. The progenitor virus they discovered was remarkable in its effects. It enhanced cellular regeneration, potentially offering immortality or at least dramatically extended lifespan. But it also had catastrophic rejection rates, killing the vast majority of test subjects, their bodies unable to adapt to the viral transformation, their cells breaking down, their minds deteriorating, death coming quickly to almost everyone exposed, except for rare individuals with compatible genetic markers, individuals who might survive infection and potentially gain the enhanced abilities the virus offered, making progenitor simultaneously incredibly promising and incredibly lethal. A discovery that could revolutionize human potential, but only for the lucky few who didn't die screaming as their bodies rejected the infection. The founding of Umbrella Corporation, 1968. In 1968, Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford founded Umbrella Corporation, ostensibly a pharmaceutical company, presenting themselves as researchers dedicated to medical advancement, to curing disease, to improving human health and longevity. The public face of Umbrella showing laboratories and white coats and clinical research, the respectable veneer of scientific progress. But beneath this surface, beneath the PR and the legitimate pharmaceutical products, was a different agenda. Spencer's true purpose: weaponizing the progenitor virus, creating biological weapons, developing what he called bioorganic weapons, or BOWs, living creatures transformed by viral infection into weapons that could be controlled, deployed, sold to the highest bidder. The 3 founders had different motivations, different visions for what Umbrella should become, creating tensions that would shape the company's development, that would lead eventually to betrayals and murders, and the fractured nightmare that Umbrella became. Dr. Edward Ashford was the idealist, believing genuinely in the potential for progenitor research to benefit humanity, to cure disease, to extend life, to make the world better through their discoveries. And this idealism made him dangerous to Spencer's true agenda, made him an obstacle that would need to be removed, and conveniently, tragically, Ashford died in 1968 during experiments with the progenitor virus. His death officially ruled accidental but whispered about in dark corners of Umbrella, suspected by some to have been Spencer's first murder. The first elimination of someone who stood between Spencer and his vision of Umbrella as weapons manufacturer rather than pharmaceutical company. Dr. James Marcus was the genius researcher, brilliant and obsessive, dedicating himself to understanding the progenitor virus at molecular level, conducting experiments that pushed ethical boundaries, creating the foundation for what would eventually become the T virus. His research at the Arklay Mountains laboratory producing the early mutations, the early weapons, the prototypes that later programs would refine. Marcus disappearing so completely into his research that he became almost forgotten, relegated to the background as Spencer built the corporate empire. But Marcus was working, always working, his experiments continuing in isolated laboratories, his brilliant mind creating horrors that would emerge decades later. Lord Oswell E. Spencer was the architect of Umbrella's true purpose, the man behind the corporate structure, the wealth, the political connections, the military contracts, the slow transformation of pharmaceutical company into bioweapons manufacturer, Spencer operating from the shadows, rarely appearing publicly, building an empire on foundations of death, seeing the progenitor virus not as medical breakthrough but as weapon, as tool for reshaping the world according to his vision, as path toward godhood, toward becoming creator of new life forms, toward transcending human limitations, and this vision, this megalomaniacal dream, drove Umbrella's research programs, channeled billions into viral research, created the structure that would eventually produce the T virus, the G virus, all the biological horrors that would escape containment and destroy Raccoon City. Early research and the Arklay Mountains Laboratory, 1968-1978. Throughout the 1970s, Umbrella established multiple research facilities, the most significant being the Arklay Mountains Laboratory Complex outside Raccoon City, a sprawling underground facility hidden beneath a mansion. The perfect cover for illegal research, for experiments that couldn't withstand public scrutiny, for the development of biological weapons in direct violation of international law. Spencer choosing this location carefully, remote enough for secrecy, close enough to Raccoon City for resources and cover, creating the facility that would become ground zero for the first major outbreak, though that was still years away, still waiting as researchers worked methodically through the 1970s, studying progenitor, attempting to create more stable variants, seeking ways to reduce the rejection rate, to make the virus more controllable, more weaponizable. Dr. Marcus directed much of this early research, his work focusing on using living hosts as incubators, particularly leeches, his experiments creating the beginnings of what would later be called the T virus, though at this stage it was still experimental, still unstable, still producing unpredictable results. Test subjects dying or transforming into creatures that couldn't be controlled. Early versions of what would eventually become zombies and other BOWs. But in the 1970s, these were failures more often than successes, problems to be solved rather than products to be deployed. Years of patient work building toward the breakthroughs that would come in the 1980s. The Arklay Mountains facility was where it began, really, where the path toward Raccoon City's destruction was laid, where the T-virus development happened, where the first successful BOWs were created, where researchers crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, where human test subjects were exposed to experimental viruses, where failures were disposed of quietly, where success was measured in how effectively transformed subjects could kill rather than whether the research was ethical or legal or safe. The facility operating throughout the 1970s with minimal oversight, with Spencer's protection, with funding that seemed unlimited, building toward the disasters that would unfold in subsequent decades. Let this foundation settle. As we pause in this early period, as sleep deepens around you, let the foundation of Umbrella's evil settle into understanding. 3 men found a virus. They built a company. They masked weapons research as pharmaceutical development. They established laboratories in remote locations. They began experimenting on human subject. They created the structure that would eventually kill millions. And all of this happened in the 1960s and 1970s, before most of the characters we know in Resident Evil were even born, before the mansion incident, before Raccoon City, before any of the game's events, just 3 men and their ambition, their greed, their willingness to transform disease into weapon, their decision to pursue power and profit regardless of cost. The timeline begins here, in West Africa in 1966, in the founding of Umbrella in 1968, in the Arklay Mountains Laboratory throughout the 1970s. Years of research laying groundwork, years of experiments producing failures and occasional successes. Years when the world didn't know that bioweapons were being developed. When Raccoon City didn't know that beneath the mansion in the nearby mountains, researchers were creating the viruses that would eventually destroy their city. When the future was being written in viral code, in genetic manipulation, in the slow refinement of biological weapons that would escape containment, that would spread beyond control, that would demonstrate why weaponizing disease was always doomed to fail catastrophically. Rest now with this understanding, drift deeper into sleep knowing we've begun at the beginning, with discovery and founding and early research, with the 1960s and 1970s laying foundation for everything that follows, for the T-virus and the mansion incident and Raccoon City's fall, all of it beginning here, with 3 men and a flower, with progenitor virus and Umbrella Corporation, with the decision to transform medical research into weapons program, with the moment when science became militarized, when viruses became tools, when the path toward apocalypse was first walked by researchers who couldn't imagine where it led, who thought they could control what they created, who believed biological weapons could be contained, deployed, managed, not understanding that viruses mutate, spread, escape, that creating diseases powerful enough to be weapons means creating diseases powerful enough to destroy everything, including the corporations that made them, including the cities where they're developed, including the world itself if given enough time and opportunity. Sleep gently through this foundation period, this decade plus of preparation, this era before the outbreaks, when Umbrella was still building, still researching, still preparing the nightmares that would emerge in the 1980s and beyond, when the timeline was young and the worst was yet to come, when Spencer's vision was still being realized, when Marcus's research was still bearing fruit, when the viruses were being perfected, when the BOWs were being created, when everything was moving toward the mansion incident, toward the moment when the timeline would accelerate, when outbreaks would begin happening, when the bioweapons would escape their laboratories and prove that humans cannot control what they create, that weaponizing disease leads inevitably to disaster, that the path Umbrella walked leads only to death, as we'll see in the decades that follow, as the timeline continues, as we move from foundation to incident, from research to outbreak, from the 1970s into the 1980s when everything changes, when the first major containment failure occurs, when the mansion becomes a tomb, when Raccoon City's fate is sealed though the city doesn't know it yet, when the Resident Evil timeline truly begins. Part 2. The T-Virus and the First Betrayals, 1978-1988. As we continue through this timeline, as consciousness drifts further toward rest, we move into the late 1970s and through the 1980s, a decade when progenitor research finally bore fruit, when the T-Virus was created, when the first successful BOWs emerged, when betrayals within Umbrella began reshaping the company, when Marcus was murdered and his research stolen, when new players like Albert Wesker entered the story, when the stage was being set for the Arklay Mountains incident, when everything was moving toward the mansion, toward the first outbreak, toward the moment when the bioorganic weapons would escape containment and begin killing humans not in controlled tests, but in chaotic violence that nobody could stop. The creation of the T-Virus, 1978. In 1978, Dr. James Marcus achieved breakthrough at the Arklay Mountains training facility, successfully creating what he called the Tyrant Virus, or T-Virus, a modification of progenitor that was more stable, more infectious, more reliably weaponizable than any previous variant. Marcus, having spent a decade experimenting with different approaches, different host organisms, different methods of viral manipulation, finally finding the right combination, the right sequence of mutations, creating a virus that would transform humans into aggressive creatures, zombies as they would later be called, reanimating dead tissue, overriding higher brain functions while maintaining motor control, creating weapons that could spread infection through bites and scratches, that could be manufactured relatively easily, that could be deployed in various scenarios, exactly what Spencer wanted, exactly what Umbrella needed to begin serious bioweapons production. The T-Virus worked through a process that was almost elegant in its horror, infecting humans through multiple vectors including bites, scratches, bodily fluid contact, even aerosol transmission in concentrated doses. The virus entering the bloodstream, spreading rapidly through the body, attacking the central nervous system, beginning the transformation that would turn living humans into mindless creatures driven by hunger and aggression. The transformation taking hours or days depending on infection method and dosage, during which time the infected person would experience fever, confusion, pain, their humanity slowly dissolving as the virus rewrote their neural pathways, their behavior becoming erratic, violent, until finally the transformation completed and they became zombies, creatures that retained basic motor functions and aggressive drives, but lost everything that made them human, everything that made them people, reduced to walk-in weapons that could spread infection, that could attack survivors, that could overwhelm containment through sheer numbers and persistence. Marcus's success with the T-virus was also his death sentence, though he didn't know it yet. Didn't understand that creating something Spencer wanted so badly made him expendable, made him a threat to be eliminated rather than a valuable researcher to be protected. The politics of Umbrella Corporation turning deadly as success bred betrayal, as Spencer moved to consolidate power and eliminate anyone who might challenge him, anyone who knew too much, anyone who could claim credit for Umbrella's most valuable product. The T-virus being worth billions in potential military contracts, worth empires in the bioweapons black market, worth killing for, and Spencer was always willing to kill for power and profit. The rise of Albert Wesker, 1907–1988. In the late 1970s, a young researcher named Albert Wesker entered Umbrella's orbit, recruited by Spencer himself. Recognized as someone with potential, someone intelligent and ambitious and, crucially, lacking normal moral constraints. The perfect person to carry forward Umbrella's illegal research programs, to do what needed to be done without hesitation or conscience. Wesker quickly proving himself valuable, rising through Umbrella's ranks, being entrusted with increasingly sensitive projects, becoming Spencer's chosen successor in many ways, the man who would carry forward the vision of human enhancement through viral infection, who would pursue godhood through biological transformation, who shared Spencer's ambitions if not his methods, creating the complex relationship that would eventually lead to Spencer's death decades later, but which in the 1980s was one of mentor and student, of master and apprentice, of two megalomaniacs recognizing each other. Wesker worked under Marcus at the Arclay training facility in the early 1980s, learning viral research, studying the T-virus, understanding the bioweapons development process, all while reporting to Spencer, all while building his own plans, his own vision for what he would do with the power that viral infection could grant. Wesker, from the beginning, understanding that the real value of Umbrella's research wasn't in selling weapons to military contractors, but in using those weapons to transform oneself, to transcend human limitations, to become something more. This vision driving him through decades of schemes and betrayals, through the Mansion incident and beyond, through death and resurrection, through the entire saga that would span from the 1980s through the 2000s. Wesker being one of the few consistent threads connecting multiple outbreaks, multiple incidents, always surviving, always adapting, always pursuing his grand vision of human evolution through forced viral transformation. The Murder of Dr. Marcus, 1988. In July 1988, Spencer ordered the assassination of Dr. James Marcus, the T-virus's creator, the brilliant researcher who had dedicated 20 years to Umbrella's research programs, killed because he knew too much, because he could claim ownership of the T-virus, because Spencer wanted complete control and Marcus represented potential challenge to that control. The assassination carried out by two of Marcus's own students, Albert Wesker and William Birkin, researchers who had learned from Marcus and now murdered their mentor on Spencer's orders, shooting Marcus and leaving his body in the underground facility, destroying evidence of his research except what they copied for their own use, eliminating the man who created Umbrella's most valuable weapon and claiming credit for his work, the ultimate betrayal. The moment when Umbrella's internal politics became openly murderous, though this murder, like so many others, was covered up, explained away, hidden beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy and misdirection. Marcus's death should have been the end of his story, but death in Resident Evil is rarely permanent, especially for researchers who experimented extensively with their own creations. Marcus, having apparently exposed himself to experimental leeches that carried his research, his body becoming host to organisms that preserved his consciousness somehow, his mind surviving death through the very bioweapons he created. Though this wouldn't be discovered for years, wouldn't become relevant until a decade later when Marcus or something wearing Marcus's face emerged, seeking revenge, creating the incident that would trigger the mansion outbreak, that would bring Astieris to the Arklay Mountains, that would begin the public story of Resident Evil, even though the private story had been unfolding for decades. Wesker and Birkin took over Marcus's research after killing him, continuing T-virus development, refining the weapon, creating new variants, their work throughout the late 1980s, producing the versions of the T-virus that would be active during the Mansion incident, that would create the zombies and other BOWs that STARS would encounter. Their research facility in the Arklay Mountains becoming the center of Umbrella's bioweapons program, the place where illegal experiments continued without pause, where human test subjects were infected and studied, where BOWs were developed and refined, where the disaster was brewing that would eventually destroy containment, that would spread infection beyond the laboratory, that would begin the sequence of outbreaks that would eventually destroy Raccoon City. The development of BOWs, 1980s. Throughout the 1980s, Umbrella developed various bioorganic weapons using the T-virus and its variants, creating creatures designed for specific combat roles, attempting to build a catalog of biological weapons that could be sold to military organizations, terrorist groups, anyone with sufficient money and lack of ethics to purchase living weapons. The product line including creatures that we would later recognize from the games: Cerberus dogs, zombies, hunters, chimeras, early tyrant prototypes, all of them created through T-virus infection of humans or animals, all of them designed to kill, all of them unstable, difficult to control, prone to attacking anyone nearby, regardless of whether they were enemy combatants or Umbrella personnel. The BOW program demonstrating repeatedly that biological weapons cannot be truly controlled, that creating killers means creating things that kill indiscriminately, that the premise of controllable bioweapons is fundamentally flawed. The Cerberus program infected dogs with T-virus, creating creatures with enhanced strength and aggression, with deteriorating skin and exposed musculature, with single-minded drive to attack and infect, the dogs being easier to produce than humanoid BOWs, cheaper to maintain, requiring less viral material for transformation, making them popular products in Umbrella's early weapon catalogs, though they were still difficult to control, still prone to attacking handlers, still representing more danger than practical military value. But Umbrella sold them anyway, deployed them in field tests anyway, used them as security in their facilities anyway, the Cerberus dogs becoming one of the most recognizable symbols of Resident Evil's bio-horror aesthetic. The Hunter program attempted to create more sophisticated BOWs, combining human DNA with reptilian genetic material, infecting the result with T virus, producing creatures with enhanced speed and agility, with razor-sharp claws capable of decapitation attacks, with enough intelligence to hunt strategically while remaining controllable through training and conditioning. The hunters representing Umbrella's attempt to create surgical strike weapons, bioorganic assassins that could be deployed for specific targets, though control remained problematic, though the hunters often killed indiscriminately, though the program demonstrated that adding intelligence to bioweapons makes them more dangerous to everyone, including their creators. The Tyrant program was Umbrella's ultimate goal, creating humanoid BOWs with massive strength, enhanced durability, regenerative abilities, creatures that could serve as super soldiers, as living tanks, as the apex of bioweapons development, but Tyrants required specific genetic markers in their hosts, similar to the original progenitor virus, making suitable subjects rare, making mass production difficult, the few successful Tyrants being powerful but unstable, prone to mutation, difficult to control even with limiting devices, though Umbrella pursued this program relentlessly throughout the 1980s and beyond, seeing Tyrants as their flagship product, as the bioweapon that would make them dominant in global arms markets, that would justify decades of research and billions in investment. The stage is set by 1988. By the end of this decade, everything was in position for the outbreak. Marcus was dead, but his consciousness preserved in leeches. Wesker and Birkin had taken over research programs. T-virus was being produced and tested extensively. BOWs filled containment cells in underground facilities. The Arklay Mountains laboratory was operating at capacity, conducting illegal experiments, exposing test subjects to viral infection, creating the conditions that would eventually lead to containment failure, to escape, to infection spreading beyond the laboratory into the Arklay Mountains forest, to the beginning of the public story, to the moment when STIRAS would be called to investigate strange murders in the mountains, to the mansion incident, to Resident Evil beginning not as origin but as revelation, as the moment when Umbrella's decades of secret research would be exposed, as the moment when the bioweapons would escape their cages, as the point in the timeline where horror becomes public. Drift deeper in this understanding. As this section concludes, as sleep claims more of your consciousness, let the 1980s settle over you like a heavy fog, understanding that this decade was when the T-virus matured, when BOWs were created, when internal betrayals began, when Marcus was murdered, when Wesker rose, when everything moved toward the mansion, toward outbreak, toward the beginning of Resident Evil as we know it, but understanding also that the public story begins in 1998, that we have a decade between the end of major research developments and the beginning of major outbreaks. A decade when the weapons were being refined, when production was ramping up, when Umbrella was preparing to market their biological horrors, when the laboratories were full of test subjects and experimental creatures, when containment was weakening, when the outbreak was inevitable, approaching, waiting like a bomb with slow fuse. Marcus's preserved consciousness plotting revenge, research accidents accumulating, safety protocols being ignored, corporate pressure demanding results faster than safety allowed, creating perfect conditions for disaster. Rest now in this interperiod, in the late 1980s, in the years between Marcus's murder and the mansion incident, in the calm before the storm, in the time when Umbrella was at its height, when their research programs were producing results, when they believed they could control what they'd created, when they thought bioweapons would make them rich and powerful, when they didn't understand that viral weapons cannot be contained indefinitely, that biological horrors eventually escape every laboratory, that creating zombies and monsters means eventually being killed by zombies and monsters, that weaponizing disease leads ultimately to being infected by that disease, lessons that Umbrella would learn too late, lessons written in the bodies of Raccoon City's residents, lessons carved into the ruins of the mansion, lessons we'll explore as the timeline continues, as we move toward 1998, toward the mansion incident, toward the beginning of the Outbreak saga, toward STRS and zombies and T-virus spreading beyond containment, toward the first major public incident in Resident Evil's timeline. Though private incidents, contained incidents, covered-up incidents happened throughout the 1980s, happening constantly in Umbrella's laboratories, their test subjects becoming zombies, their BOWs escaping containment cells, their researchers being infected and transformed, all of it hidden, cleaned up, explained away, until finally the outbreak was too large to contain, too obvious to hide, too devastating to explain away, and the world learned what Umbrella had been doing, learned about bioorganic weapons, learned about the T-virus, learned that the dead could walk, that corporations could be evil beyond comprehension, that pharmaceutical companies could transform into death merchants, that beneath the surface of normal life, beneath the respectable facade, horror was being manufactured. Weapons were being created from disease. The apocalypse was being prepared in underground laboratories, just waiting for the moment when containment failed, when the viruses escaped, when the timeline accelerated toward catastrophe, toward Raccoon City, toward the world of bioterrorism that would define the 21st century in Resident Evil's universe. Part 3: The Mansion Incident and Raccoon City's Beginning, 1998. As we arrive at 1998, as sleep deepens into dreams, we reach the beginning of Resident Evil as most people know it. The mansion incident in the Arklay Mountains, the first game's events. STARS, investigating strange murders and discovering Umbrella's research facility. Encountering zombies and other BOWs. Fighting through horror after horror. Learning about the T-virus, about Umbrella's crimes, about Wesker's betrayal. This incident being the spark that ignites decades of outbreaks. The moment when bioweapons become public knowledge, when containment fails catastrophically, when the timeline accelerates dramatically, when Raccoon City's fate is sealed, though the city itself doesn't know it yet, when Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine and Barry Burton and Rebecca Chambers become survivors of biological horror, when the Spencer Mansion becomes a tomb, when everything changes. The Marcus incident and outbreak begins. May-July 1998. In May 1998, something awakened in the Arklay Mountains, something that had been dormant for a decade. Marcus, or the leech colony, that carried his consciousness, emerging from the underground facility where he'd been killed, seeking revenge against Umbrella, against Wesker and Birkin who had murdered him, against Spencer who had ordered his death. The leech colony retaining Marcus's knowledge, his memories, his anger. using the training facility to begin spreading T-virus through the Arklay Mountains, releasing test subjects, infecting the forest, creating the conditions that would draw STARS to the area, deliberately creating a crisis that would expose Umbrella's operations, that would destroy the Mansion research facility, that would punish those who had betrayed him. Through May, June, and early July, reports began reaching Raccoon City police of strange attacks in the Arklay Mountains, hikers disappearing, campers found dead or missing, bizarre murders with signs of cannibalism, cases that defied explanation, that seemed like serial killer activity but with characteristics that didn't match normal criminal psychology. The attacks increasing in frequency and violence, creating enough concern that Raccoon City Police sent their Special Tactics Team, STARS, to investigate, first sending Bravo Team on July 23rd, then Alpha Team on July 24th when Bravo Team's helicopter was found crashed in the forest, neither team understanding what they were flying into, what they would discover, what horror waited in those mountains. Bravo Team's tragedy, July 23, 1998. Bravo Team, consisting of Enrico Marini, Rebecca Chambers, Richard Aiken, Forrest Spire, Kenneth Sullivan, and Edward Dewey, deployed on July 23 to investigate the strange murders, their helicopter experiencing engine failure over the Arklay Mountains, pilot Kevin Dooley trying to make emergency landing, the helicopter crashing in the forest, killing Dewey, scattering the remaining team members, forcing them to continue their investigation on foot, wounded, separated, moving through forest where infected dogs roamed, where zombies wandered, where T-virus contamination was widespread, though they didn't understand that yet, didn't recognize the signs, didn't know what they were facing. Rebecca Chambers, the youngest STARS member, became separated from her team, encountering an overturned military police transport train nearby, investigating and finding the entire train crew dead or transformed into zombies. Discovering another survivor, a man named Billy Cohen, who had been a prisoner on the transport. Convicted criminal who claimed innocence, the two of them forced to work together to survive the train's horrors, eventually reaching the training facility where they discovered Marcus or his leech colony, where they fought through more infected and BOWs, where Rebecca learned about Umbrella and the T-virus, where she first encountered the bio-horror that would define her life, surviving through combination of luck and Billy's combat skills and her medical knowledge, eventually escaping the facility as it self-destructed. Rebecca continuing to search for her team. Billy disappearing into the wilderness, his fate left uncertain. The rest of Bravo Team fared poorly, scattered through the forest, picked off one by infected dogs and zombies, Forrest Spire killed and partially consumed, Kenneth Sullivan torn apart, Richard Aiken bitten by giant snake and slowly dying from venom and infection, Enrico Marini making it to the mansion but being killed by Wesker before he could fully expose Umbrella's operations, only Rebecca surviving Bravo Team's deployment, surviving to join Alpha Team when they arrived, to help them navigate the mansion's horrors, to share what she'd learned about the T-virus and Umbrella, becoming one of the survivors who would carry knowledge of this incident forward, who would dedicate her life to fighting bioterrorism because of what she experienced that night. Alpha Team and the Mansion, July 24, 1998. On July 24th, when Bravo Team failed to report, STARS Alpha Team deployed, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Albert Wesker, Brad Vickers, and Joseph Frost, flying into the Arklay Mountains, finding Bravo Team's crashed helicopter, investigating and being attacked by infected dogs. Joseph being killed in the initial attack. The team fleeing into the forest, discovering the Spencer mansion, seeking shelter but finding something far worse. The mansion being facade for Umbrella's research facility. The building filled with zombies and other BOWs, with evidence of illegal experimentation, with test subjects who had become infected and were now wandering the halls, with traps and puzzles designed to protect Umbrella's secrets, with horror after horror as Alpha Team explored deeper, as they discovered what Umbrella had been doing, as they realized their Captain Wesker had betrayed them, was working for Umbrella, had led them there deliberately to test the BOW's combat effectiveness against Special Operations soldiers. Chris and Jill, along with Barry and Rebecca, fought through the mansion, through zombies that were once human, through Cerberus dogs, through hunters that seemed like nightmares made flesh, through the various creatures that Umbrella had created, discovering laboratories filled with research notes, reading about the T-virus, learning about Umbrella's bioweapons program, finding evidence of human experimentation, uncovering decades of corporate crimes, the truth becoming clear through documents and recordings, and the physical evidence of horror everywhere they looked. The mansion being museum of Umbrella's evil, display of what happens when corporations prioritize profit over human life, when research becomes weaponized, when viruses become tools. In the underground laboratory beneath the mansion, they encountered the Tyrant, the T-0002 model, Umbrella's attempt to create the ultimate bioorganic weapon, humanoid creature of immense size and strength, with exposed heart and massive claws, with power that made it nearly unstoppable. Wesker releasing it as his final test, attempting to prove the Tyrant's capabilities, but the creature immediately attacked him. The Tyrant being uncontrollable even by its creators, stabbing Wesker through the chest, killing him, or so it seemed. Wesker having secretly injected himself with experimental virus that would revive him, that would grant him superhuman abilities, that would begin his transformation into the antagonist he would become in later games. But in the moment, it seemed the Tyrant had killed him, turned on its creator, proven yet again that bioweapons cannot be controlled. The survivors, Chris, Jill, Barry, Rebecca, activated the mansion's self-destruct sequence, fighting through more BOWs, eventually battling the Tyrant multiple times as it pursued them, calling Brad Vickers to bring the rescue helicopter, escaping moments before the mansion exploded, the facility destroyed. Umbrella's research there erased, the evidence mostly lost in the fire and collapse, but the survivors carried the truth with them, knew what Umbrella had done, knew about the T-virus and bioweapons, knew that this incident was just the beginning, that Umbrella had other facilities, other research programs, that the mansion was one location in a larger network of horror, and they determined to expose Umbrella, to shut down the bioweapons program, to prevent future incidents, not knowing that they were already too late, that contamination had already spread beyond the mansion, that Raccoon City was already infected, that the next and far worse outbreak was only months away. Umbrella's response and cover-up. July-September 1998. After the mansion incident, Umbrella moved quickly to contain the fallout, using their political connections and financial power to suppress investigation, to discredit the STARS survivors who spoke about zombies and bioweapons, to present the incident as tragic accident, gas leak or fire, nothing suggesting illegal research or corporate crimes. The survivors finding themselves isolated, disbelieved, unable to get law enforcement or media or anyone with power to take their testimony seriously. Umbrella's influence protecting them from consequences, from prosecution, from any real accountability for what happened in the mansion. Wesker, who survived his death through experimental viral infection, went underground, working for rival organizations, pursuing his own agenda of collecting viral samples and bioweapons research, planning for future schemes, becoming the recurring antagonist whose influence would be felt across multiple incidents, multiple outbreaks, always surviving, always manipulating, always working toward his grand vision of forced human evolution. The mansion incident being his first death and resurrection, the beginning of his transformation from umbrella researcher to independent operator, from corporate agent to megalomaniacal villain seeking godhood. Meanwhile, beneath Raccoon City, in the underground research facility called NASI, William Birkin continued his work on the G-virus, his attempt to surpass the T-virus, to create something more powerful, more transformative, more valuable. Birkin, having worked for Umbrella for over a decade, having helped murder Marcus, having taken over T-virus research, now pursuing his own project that would prove even more catastrophic than the T-virus, that would directly cause Raccoon City's destruction, that would demonstrate the ultimate hubris of bioweapons research. Believing you can create something more dangerous than what already exists and somehow control it better. Believing you can weaponize disease more effectively if you just try harder. Make the virus more powerful. Engineer more horrific transformations. Not understanding that greater power means greater catastrophe when containment fails, as it always does, as it would in September 1998, when Umbrella's soldiers came for the G-virus, when Birkin resisted, when everything went wrong, when Raccoon City's fate was sealed. Rest in this transition. As this section concludes, as sleep deepens further, let July 1998 settle into memory. The mansion incident, STARS discovering Umbrella's crimes, zombies and BOWs becoming real rather than theoretical, contamination spreading beyond containment, survivors escaping but carrying psychological trauma that would affect them for life, Chris and Jill and the others becoming the core protagonists of Resident Evil's saga, their experience in the mansion making them uniquely qualified to fight bioterrorism, uniquely damaged by what they witnessed, uniquely determined to shut down Umbrella and prevent future outbreaks. Drift deeper, knowing that the mansion incident was the first public outbreak but not the last, was the opening move in a campaign that would span decades, was the moment when bioweapons escaped the laboratory and proved impossible to contain, when the careful secrecy of Umbrella's research programs was shattered, when the existence of zombies and viral weapons became known at least to those who survived, even if the general public remained ignorant, even if official channels refused to acknowledge what happened. The truth was out there. The survivors knew, and they would keep fighting, keep trying to expose Umbrella, keep working to prevent the next outbreak, not knowing they were already too late, that contamination had spread beyond the mansion, that Raccoon City was living its final months, that September would bring catastrophe that made the mansion incident look small by comparison, that the next section of our timeline would cover not a single building but an entire city. Not dozens of zombies but tens of thousands. Not a night of horror but days of apocalypse. Not survivors numbering in the single digits but a city of 100,000 reduced to a handful. The escalation from mansion to city demonstrating how quickly bioweapons can spread, how thoroughly they can destroy, how little protection civilization offers when viral outbreak reaches critical mass, when the dead walk in numbers that overwhelm every defense, when a city becomes necropolis, when Raccoon City falls. Part 4. The Fall of Raccoon City, September 1998. Continuing with the Raccoon City outbreak section. As we move into September 1998, as sleep carries you deeper into dreams, we approach the most devastating outbreak in Resident Evil's timeline. The complete destruction of Raccoon City, a metropolitan area of 100,000 people, transformed into a city of the dead within days. T-virus spreading through the population. G-virus creating unique horrors. Umbrella losing control completely. The U.S. government eventually deciding to sterilize the outbreak with nuclear weapon, erasing the city from the map, killing any survivors who remained, covering up the incident, leaving only ruins and scattered survivors and the knowledge that an entire city died because of corporate bioweapons research, because Umbrella couldn't contain what they created, because profit mattered more than human life. The fall of Raccoon City being the defining moment of Resident Evil's timeline. The event that shadows everything that comes after. The proof that bioweapons development leads inevitably to catastrophe. The G-Virus Incident, September 2023, 1998. The outbreak began on September 22nd when Umbrella Security Service operatives raided William Birkin's laboratory beneath Raccoon City, attempting to secure the G-Virus. Umbrella having decided that Birkin's research was too valuable to allow him to continue working independently, that they needed the G-Virus under corporate control, that Birkin himself was expendable. The raid going wrong when Birkin refused to surrender his research. The USS soldiers shooting him multiple times, mortally wounding him, leaving him to die as they took his G-virus samples and prepared to leave the facility. But Birkin dying, crawling to his remaining G-virus sample, injecting himself in desperation, the virus transforming him, saving his life but destroying his humanity. Birkin becoming the first G-creature, massive mutating monster that would hunt through the city seeking to implant embryos in hosts, particularly targeting his own daughter Sherry. The G-virus programming him to reproduce even as it destroyed his mind. Birkin, in his transformed state, attacked the USS operatives, killing most of them, their return fire missing or ineffective against his mutated body. They dropped the vials of T-virus they were carrying, the containers shattering, virus contaminating the facility, spreading into the sewer system that connected the laboratory to the city above. Rats in the sewers becoming infected, carrying T-virus through the underground networks, emerging in various locations across Raccoon City, biting civilians, spreading infection. The outbreak beginning silently, invisibly, people being bitten by infected rats and not realizing they'd been exposed to weaponized virus, going home, going to work, the infection incubating, symptoms developing over the following days, the infected gradually transforming into zombies, attack in others, spreading infection further. Exponential growth curve beginning that would overwhelm the city's ability to respond within 48 hours. The infection spreads. September 23-26, 1998. For several days, Raccoon City experienced what seemed like crime wave or mass outbreak of violent flu. People acting erratically, attacking neighbors and family members. Reports flooding police dispatch of disturbances, assaults, bizarre behavior. The Raccoon City Police Department responding to hundreds of calls. Officers encountering situations they couldn't understand. People who seemed dead walking and attacking. Bites that transmitted something that made victims sick within hours. The police unable to contain the incidents, unable to understand what was happening, their numbers inadequate for the scale of the crisis, officers becoming infected, transforming into zombies themselves. The RPD becoming overwhelmed as the outbreak escalated through September 23rd, 24th, 25th, the city gradually collapsing into chaos. By September 26th, Raccoon City was in full outbreak, tens of thousands infected, zombies filling the streets, hospitals overwhelmed, emergency services collapsed, military cordons being established around the city to prevent spread. Evacuation attempts failing as infected mixed with evacuees. Spreading contamination beyond the city limits. Requiring broader quarantine. The situation rapidly becoming disaster that civilian authorities couldn't handle. The National Guard being deployed, military taking control, but even they were unprepared for bioweapons outbreak. For zombies that didn't stop when shot center mass, for infection that spread through bites and contact with infected blood, for the sheer numbers of infected overwhelming defensive positions, soldiers becoming casualties, becoming infected themselves, the cordon weakening as the outbreak challenged every assumption about crowd control and civil emergency response. Inside the city, civilians tried to survive, barricading themselves in buildings, fleeing toward rumored evacuation points, fighting zombies with whatever weapons they could find. Most of them dying, most of them being infected and transforming, joining the hordes of undead, the living population declining rapidly as zombie population grew. Raccoon City becoming necropolis within days of the initial outbreak, the speed of collapse demonstrating why bioweapons are fundamentally different from conventional weapons. Why viral outbreaks can't be contained the same way as natural disasters. Why creating diseases powerful enough to be weapons means creating diseases powerful enough to destroy everything they touch, including the cities where they're developed. Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield enter the city, September 29, 1998. On September 29th, 7 days into the outbreak, 2 civilians entered Raccoon City through different routes. Leon S. Kennedy, a rookie police officer reporting for his first day at RPD, and Claire Redfield, searching for her brother Chris, who had been in Raccoon City investigating Umbrella before disappearing. Both of them arriving to find the city in ruins, zombies everywhere, fires burning, no signs of organized resistance or evacuation, just chaos and death and infection. The 2 of them meeting when attacked by zombies, fighting together briefly before being separated by car crash and explosion. Forced to navigate the city separately, trying to survive, trying to find escape. Their paths intersecting periodically as they explored the nightmare that Raccoon City had become. Leon made his way to the Raccoon Police Department, finding the station overrun with zombies, most of the police force dead or transformed. The few survivors scattered. Leon meeting Ada Wong, a woman claiming to be FBI agent searching for her boyfriend who worked for Umbrella, though she was actually a spy for a rival organization. Sent to retrieve the G-virus sample, Ada and Leon working together through parts of the RPD and the underground facility beneath it, developing complicated relationship. Leon falling for her. Ada maintaining her cover while pursuing her actual mission. Their partnership ending when Ada apparently fell to her death in the underground laboratory. Leon grieving her though she actually survived. Working for Wesker. Retrieving the G-virus sample. Escaping the city with her objective completed. Claire navigated from the city streets to the police station to the underground facility, encountering Sherry Birkin, daughter of William Birkin, the girl being targeted by her mutated father for G-virus implantation. Claire protecting Sherry, fighting William's increasingly grotesque transformations, the G-virus causing him to mutate multiple times, growing larger and more powerful with each transformation, losing any remaining human characteristics, becoming purely monstrous. Claire and Sherry eventually encountering Leon in the underground facility, working together to escape, fighting William in his final form, massive blob-like creature that barely resembled anything that had once been human, defeating him and reaching the train that would carry them out of the city, escaping moments before the underground facility was destroyed, but still trapped in Raccoon City as the outbreak continued above ground. Jill Valentine's escape. September Dasats. 2830, 1998. Jill Valentine, STARS, survivor from the mansion incident, was in Raccoon City when the outbreak began, having stayed to gather evidence against Umbrella, to prepare for investigation that would expose the bioweapons program, finding herself trapped when the T-virus spread, spending several days surviving in the city, watching it collapse, waiting for evacuation that never came, eventually attempting to escape on September 28th, fighting through streets filled with zombies, through BOWs that Umbrella deployed in the city, creatures like the Nemesis, a bioorganic weapon specifically programmed to eliminate STARS members, pursuing Jill relentlessly through the city, attacking repeatedly, nearly killing her multiple times, the Nemesis being more intelligent than normal BOWs, able to use weapons, able to pursue targets across multiple locations, demonstrating Umbrella's progress in creating controllable bioweapons, even as the city around it proved those weapons could never be truly controlled. Jill navigated through Raccoon City for 3 days, September 28th through 30th, fighting zombies and Nemesis and other BOWs, encountering other survivors including Carlos Oliveira, member of Umbrella's Biohazard Countermeasure Service, sent to evacuate civilians, but finding the situation beyond UBCS capabilities, Carlos and Jill working together periodically, developing trust despite Carlos working for Umbrella, both of them recognizing that survival mattered more than corporate loyalties. Carlos eventually helping Jill escape through connections with remaining military forces, the two of them among the last people to leave Raccoon City alive, witnessing the final hours of the city, seeing the complete collapse of civilization in a place where 100,000 people had lived normal lives just a week earlier. The sterilization of Raccoon City. October 1st, 1998. On October 1st, 1998, at dawn, the U.S. government made the decision to sterilize Raccoon City with nuclear weapon, calculating that the outbreak could not be contained through conventional means, that attempting to clear the city of infected would cost thousands of military casualties, that the risk of T-virus spreading beyond the quarantine zone was too high, that the only guaranteed solution was complete destruction, vaporizing the infected, the virus, the evidence, everything, using Sterilization Operation Code XX, firing experimental thermobaric missile at Raccoon City's center, the explosion and resulting firestorm consuming the entire city, temperatures reaching levels that would destroy biological material, including T-virus samples, the flash visible for miles, the mushroom cloud rising over the ruins, Raccoon City ceasing to exist in seconds, 100,000 lives ended or already ended, the entire metropolitan area reduced to crater and rubble and ash, the most dramatic single action in Resident Evil's timeline, the moment when government acknowledged that bioweapons outbreak required nuclear response, that conventional warfare was insufficient against viral threats. Survivors who escaped watched from distance. Leon and Claire and Sherry, Jill and Carlos, others who made it out, watching their city die, watching the place where they lived burn in nuclear fire. The psychological trauma of this impossible to measure, impossible to process. The survivors carrying this horror forward, becoming the core group of people dedicated to exposing Umbrella, to fighting bioterrorism, to preventing future raccoon cities, motivated by witnessing apocalypse, by surviving what should have killed them, by being among the tiny handful of people who lived through Raccoon City's fall and retained their humanity. The official story, released to the public, blamed the destruction on nuclear reactor meltdown, claimed the city was evacuated before the incident, stated that casualties were minimal. All lies, all cover-up. The government cooperating with Umbrella to hide the truth about bioweapons, about T-virus outbreak, about the fact that an entire city was destroyed because of corporate research program that went wrong, the truth being classified, buried, denied, the survivors' testimony being dismissed as trauma, conspiracy theory, unreliable, their evidence being confiscated or destroyed, the cover-up nearly complete, Umbrella surviving Raccoon City's fall with their operations continuing, their other facilities still active, their bioweapons program ongoing despite this catastrophic failure. Umbrella's decline begins. Despite the cover-up, Raccoon City's destruction marked the beginning of Umbrella's decline. The company losing credibility, losing political protection, their stock price crashing, investigations beginning despite government attempts to contain them, survivors organizing, gathering evidence, leaking information, slowly building case that would eventually destroy Umbrella even if it took years. The fall of Raccoon City being too large to completely hide, too dramatic to fully explain away. Too many loose ends, too many survivors who knew the truth, too much physical evidence even in the ruins. The crater where the city had been serving as permanent reminder that something catastrophic happened. That official story didn't match physical reality. That investigation was necessary despite government resistance. Rest in the ashes. As this section concludes, as sleep deepens toward dreams, let the fall of Raccoon City settle over you like fallout, like ash, understanding that September 1998 was when bioweapons proved their ultimate horror, when a single city was consumed by outbreak, when 100,000 people died or were transformed, when civilization collapsed completely within days, when zombies filled streets by the thousands, when government concluded that nuclear weapon was necessary to contain biological outbreak, when an entire metropolitan area was erased from existence, when Resident Evil's timeline reached its darkest moment before the timeline, when the consequences of weaponizing disease were demonstrated with brutal clarity, when Umbrella's crimes became too large to hide, when survivors became witnesses to apocalypse, when the world learned, gradually, reluctantly, that bioterror was real, that corporations could be evil enough to create weapons from viruses, that the dead could walk, that cities could fall, that humanity's arrogance in weaponizing biology could lead to extinction if not contained. Drift deeper now, through the ashes of Raccoon City, through the nuclear crater, through the memories of survivors, through the cover-up and the investigations and the slow collapse of Umbrella's empire, understanding that we're halfway through this timeline, that we've covered the Foundation and the early outbreaks and the mansion, and now the city, and ahead of us lies the global spread of bioterrorism. Lies Code Veronica and RE4 and RE5 and RE6. Lies Wesker's continued scheming. Lies new viruses and new outbreaks. Lies the mold and the village and the megamycete. Lies decades of continuing horror as bioweapons proliferate, as other organizations besides Umbrella begin manufacturing biological weapons, as the technology spreads, as preventing future raccoon cities becomes impossible because the knowledge exists, because Pandora's box is open, because weaponizing disease is something humans now know how to do and can't unlearn, can only try to control, try to contain, try to prevent from escalating to global pandemic. But control is imperfect. Containment fails, prevention is incomplete, and outbreaks continue. Smaller than Raccoon City usually, more contained typically, but continuing nonetheless. The timeline extending forward through decades of bioterror, through the slow revelation that Raccoon City was not an ending, but a beginning, not a unique disaster, but the first of many, not an aberration, but the new normal in a world where biological weapons exist, where the dead can be made to walk, where viruses are tools, where the threat never truly ends, just changes form, changes location, changes specifics while remaining fundamentally the same. Humanity threatened by its own weaponized biology. Survivors fighting to prevent the next outbreak. Knowing they cannot prevent all outbreaks, only trying to minimize damage, save who they can, bear witness to horror, and continue forward despite trauma, despite loss, despite knowing that more outbreaks are coming, that the fight never ends, that Raccoon City was not unique, just worst, just biggest, just most dramatic in timeline that continues forward, that we continue through as sleep deepens, as the story extends beyond September 1998, beyond Raccoon City's ashes, into the global age of bioterrorism, into the decades that follow, into the rest of Resident Evil's extensive timeline. Part 5. The Global Spread. Code Veronica through RE5, 1998 to 2009. Continuing with the post-Raccoon City era. As we move beyond Raccoon City's fall, as sleep carries consciousness deeper, the timeline spreads globally, outbreaks occurring across multiple continents, Umbrella's remnants continuing operations, rival organizations acquiring viral samples and continuing bioweapons research, Wesker pursuing his grand schemes, survivors fighting outbreak after outbreak, the scale expanding from single mansion to single city to global threat. The years from 1998 through 2009 marking the transition from Umbrella's reign to the broader age of bioterrorism, where bioweapons technology proliferated, where prevention became international effort, where the heroes of Resident Evil fought to stop catastrophes while understanding they couldn't stop them all, could only respond, react, minimize casualties, prevent worst outcomes while accepting that outbreaks would continue. That bioterror was a permanent feature of their world now. That Raccoon City had opened era that wouldn't close. Code Veronica, Antarctica, and the Ashford Legacy, December 1998. 3 months after Raccoon City's fall, Claire Redfield continued searching for her brother Chris, infiltrating Umbrella facility in Paris, being captured and sent to Rockfort Island prison facility. Arriving just as outbreak occurred there, T-virus spreading through the prison and the adjacent research facility. Zombies filling the compound, Claire escaping her cell and fighting through the outbreak, encountering Steve Burnside, prisoner who helped her survive. The two of them discovering that Alfred Ashford, the facility's commander, had released the T-virus deliberately. Alfred being psychologically damaged, suffering from split personality disorder, imagining he was his sister Alexia, who was actually in cryogenic stasis in an Antarctic facility, having experimented on herself with a virus of her own creation, the T. Veronica virus. Alfred protecting his sister's research while slowly losing his grip on reality. Claire and Steve eventually escaped Rockfort Island, traveling to Antarctica following Alfred, discovering the Ashford family's primary research facility hidden in the Antarctic wastes, encountering Alexia herself, who had awakened from her 15-year cryogenic sleep, her body fully adapted to the T. Veronica virus, granting her incredible powers, the ability to control BOWs telepathically, to generate fire, to transform at will, making her one of the most powerful bioweapon creations in the timeline. Her transformation having succeeded where most viral adaptations failed because she gave herself time to adapt. 15 years in cryo, allowing her body to integrate the virus rather than rejecting it catastrophically. Chris arrived in Antarctica, responding to Claire's distress call, the siblings reuniting, fighting together against Alexia and her controlled BOWs. Steve being infected with T. Veronica virus and dying in Claire's arms after temporarily regaining his humanity. Chris eventually defeating Alexia through combination of conventional weapons and the facility's self-destruct system, both siblings escaping as the Antarctic base exploded. The Ashford legacy ending with Alexia's death, though T. Veronica virus samples survived, would be collected by Wesker, would appear in future incidents. Code Veronica demonstrating that Umbrella's crimes extended globally, that their facilities existed everywhere from islands to Antarctica, that the bioweapons research had metastasized beyond any hope of complete elimination, that destroying one facility meant nothing when dozens others existed, when the research was backed up, replicated, distributed across continents. Umbrella's End and Legal Battles, 1998-2003. Through the early 2000s, Umbrella Corporation faced increasing legal and financial pressure. Survivors of Raccoon City organizing class action lawsuits, evidence of bioweapons research emerging despite cover-up attempts, government investigations finding connections between Umbrella and illegal weapons development. The company's stock becoming worthless, their facilities being raided by authorities, their executives being arrested or fleeing, the slow death of corporate empire that had dominated bioweapons research for decades. Umbrella's fall being gradual rather than sudden. Death by thousand cuts rather than single fatal blow. Investigations and lawsuits and lost contracts and criminal charges accumulating until the company collapsed under weight of its crimes. In 2003, Spencer went into hiding. Umbrella officially closed its operations, remaining assets were liquidated, the bioweapons research data was supposed to be destroyed or secured, but in reality was scattered, stolen, sold on black markets, acquired by rival organizations and terrorist groups and nations interested in bioweapons programs. Umbrella's fall actually spreading their technology rather than containing it, making bioterrorism more widespread rather than less, demonstrating that once bioweapons knowledge exists, it cannot be eliminated, only managed, only fought incident by incident, outbreak by outbreak. Umbrella's end marking not the conclusion of bioterror, but merely a transition, from single corporation controlling most bioweapons research to distributed network of smaller organizations continuing that research, making prevention harder, making incidents more varied, making the fight against bioterrorism more complex. Los Iluminados and Las Plagas, 2004. In 2004, Leon S. Kennedy, now a government agent, deployed to rural Spain following reports that the president's daughter had been kidnapped by a cult operating in remote village. Leon, arriving to find something far stranger than simple kidnapping, the village and surrounding area being controlled by Los Iluminados, religious cult that had acquired ancient parasite called Las Plagas, discovered in caves beneath the region, organisms that had been sealed away centuries ago by local nobles who recognized their danger. The cult's leader, Osmond Sadler, releasing Las Plagas deliberately, infecting the local population, creating army of controlled hosts, planning to use the president's daughter to spread plagas to the United States, to infiltrate global power structures with infected individuals, to use biological control rather than viral transformation as weapon. Las Plagas differed from previous bioweapons being parasite rather than virus, infecting hosts and controlling their behavior without zombification, the infected retaining intelligence and coordination while being subservient to master plagas held by cult leaders, making them far more dangerous than zombies, able to use weapons, follow complex orders, operate in organized groups, the ganados, infected villagers, and later the Illuminados soldiers, demonstrating how biological control could create super soldiers rather than simple monsters, how parasites offered different advantages than viruses for weaponization. Leon fought through the village and castle and island facilities, encountering various plagas mutations, rescuing Ashley Graham, the president's daughter, before she could be used in Sadler's plan, being aided by Ada Wong, who was again present collecting samples for Wesker. Leon eventually defeating Sadler and escaping with Ashley, both of them infected with plagas but having the parasites surgically removed before control could be established. The incident ending with Los Iluminados destroyed, but plagas samples retrieved by Ada, meaning this bioweapon would continue appearing in future incidents, would be studied and replicated, would join the arsenal of biological weapons that bioterrorists could deploy, Resident Evil 4 introducing parasites alongside viruses as threats, expanding the types of biological horror the series explored. The BSAA and Chris's Crusade 2003-2009 following Umbrella's collapse, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine helped found the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, BSAA, international organization dedicated to combating bioweapons threats, deploying specialized teams to respond to outbreaks, investigating bioterror organizations, working to prevent future raccoon cities, the BSAI becoming the primary heroic organization in later Resident Evil titles, the good guys fighting global bioterror, though always outnumbered, always underfunded, always reacting to incidents rather than preventing them. The nature of bioterrorism being that prevention is nearly impossible when anyone with sufficient knowledge and resources can create outbreaks. Chris and Jill conducted operations across multiple continents through the mid-2000s, fighting various bioterror threats, encountering Wesker repeatedly, their former captain now being their primary enemy, Wesker having transformed himself through viral infection into superhuman, possessing incredible speed and strength and regenerative abilities, pursuing grand plan to release virus that would kill most of humanity while forcing survivors to adapt, creating new world populated by enhanced humans, Wesker's vision being social Darwinism taken to extreme, genocide as evolution, billions dying so that the worthy could inherit Earth, his megalomania having grown to match his power, making him the central antagonist of this era. Africa and the Ouroboros virus, 2009. In 2009, Chris and new partner Sheva Alomar deployed to West Africa following reports of bioweapons activity, investigating and discovering that Wesker had established major operation in the region, developing new virus called Ouroboros that he claimed would force humanity to evolve or die. The virus being incredibly lethal. Rejection rate near 100 DARS, killing and transforming almost everyone exposed into massive, tentacled creatures. Only the rarest individuals surviving infection and potentially gaining enhanced abilities. Wesker planning to release Ouroboros globally via missiles that would spread the virus across continents, starting with Africa and expanding to full planetary coverage, killing billions, destroying civilization, restarting human evolution according to his twisted vision. Chris and Shiva fought through infected villages, through bioweapons facilities, eventually confronting Wesker at his launch facility, discovering Jill Valentine, who had been missing for years, revealed to have been captured by Wesker, used in Ouroboros research, controlled through chemical means, Chris freeing Jill from control. The three of them fighting Wesker, who had further enhanced himself with various viral samples, becoming nearly invincible, the final battle requiring combination of conventional weapons and specialized antiviral serum and environmental hazards. Wesker eventually dying in lava flow after being weakened, his dreams of forced evolution ending with him, though his influence would continue echoing through later games, through organizations he had connections with, through research he had funded, through the basic reality that he had been right about one thing. Once bioweapons technology exists, it cannot be eliminated, only fought against, repeatedly, endlessly. The Ouroboros incident ended with Wesker's death, with the African facility destroyed, with the immediate threat contained, but bioterrorism continuing, proliferating, becoming more widespread as we move into the 2010s, as other organizations fill the void left by Umbrella's collapse and Wesker's death, as bioweapons technology continues spreading, as prevention becomes increasingly impossible, as the fight continues. Rest in this global scope. As this section concludes, as sleep deepens further, let the global spread of bioterrorism wash over you, understanding that the years from 1998 to 2009 saw the threat expand beyond umbrella, beyond the United States, becoming truly international, involving parasites and evolved viruses, involving organizations across continents, Wesker pursuing godhood, Chris and the BSAA fighting global war against bioterror, containment becoming more difficult as technology proliferated, each incident teaching bioterrorists new lessons, each virus adding to available arsenal, each parasite offering new options, the variety of biological weapons increasing, the threat becoming more complex, the solutions becoming less clear. Heroes like Chris and Leon and Jill doing what they could but understanding they couldn't stop everything, couldn't prevent all outbreaks, could only respond, minimize damage, save who they could, continue fighting knowing the fight never ends. That bioterrorism is a permanent threat now that knowledge exists, that creating new viruses is easier than preventing all viruses, that humanity has opened Pandora's box and cannot close it, can only manage the horrors that escape, repeatedly, globally, continuously. Drift now through the early 2000s, through Code Veronica's Antarctic wastes, through Umbrella's collapse, through Spanish villages infected with plagas, through African facilities developing Ouroboros, through the BSAA's formation and operations, through Wesker's schemes and eventual death, through the global spread of bioterror that characterized this era, preparing for the 2010s and beyond, for RE6's global bioterror campaign, for RE7's Louisiana horror, for Village and the megamycete, for the continued evolution of biological threats as the timeline extends forward, as new viruses emerge, as old viruses reappear, as the fundamental problem of bioweapons proves unsolvable, manageable only through constant vigilance, constant response, constant sacrifice by those who fight bioterror, who deploy to outbreaks, who risk infection themselves to stop infection of others, who continue despite trauma, despite loss, despite knowing that their work never ends, that more outbreaks are coming, that the timeline continues forward through decades of horror. Part 6. The Modern Era, RE6 through Village, 2012-2021, continuing through the most recent timeline. As we enter the 2010s and early 2020s, as sleep pulls you toward final rest, the timeline reaches its modern era, where bioterrorism has become established global threat, where multiple organizations develop and deploy bioweapons, where heroes continue fighting despite the impossibility of ultimate victory. RE6's global campaign demonstrating how widespread bioterror has become. RE7, introducing the mold and taking the series in new directions. RE Village exploring further implications of megamycete. The timeline demonstrating that decades after Raccoon City, after Umbrella's fall, after countless incidents, bioterror remains active threat, perhaps more dangerous now due to proliferation, due to multiple groups having capability to create outbreaks, due to knowledge being widespread rather than contained, the modern era showing that bioweapons are a permanent feature of Resident Evil's world, that fighting them is generational struggle rather than problem that can be solved permanently. Global Bioterror Campaign, 2012-2013. In 2012-2013, the world experienced simultaneous bioterror outbreaks across multiple locations, coordinated attacks using a new virus called C-virus, chrysalid virus, a hybrid combining elements of T. veronica and G-virus, creating zombies and new creatures called Ja'avo that retained intelligence while being physically transformed. The attacks targeting major cities including Tall Oaks in the United States, Lanxiang in China, Edonia in Eastern Europe, among others, the scale of attacks demonstrating that bioterrorism had reached new level of sophistication, new level of organization, multiple coordinated incidents rather than isolated outbreaks, suggesting organization with resources and planning capability that rivaled Umbrella at its height. Leon Kennedy deployed to Tall Oaks, responding to outbreak there, discovering the president had been infected and transformed, forced to kill the president to stop spread. Leon and his new partner Helena Harper fighting through the city as it collapsed. 70,000 people dying in Tall Oaks outbreak. The city eventually being sterilized in manner reminiscent of Raccoon City, though conventional bombing rather than nuclear weapon. The destruction of a second American city to bioterror, demonstrating that lessons of Raccoon City hadn't prevented recurrence, that municipal authorities and national governments still lacked effective response to large-scale viral outbreak. Chris Redfield deployed to China with BSAA forces, fighting against Javo and tracking the source of C virus, suffering from amnesia due to traumatic incident months earlier where his entire team was killed by bioweapons. Chris eventually regaining his memories and continuing the fight, encountering Ada Wong or someone who looked like her, later revealed to be clone created by bioterrorist organization Neo Umbrella. The existence of successful human cloning adding new dimension to bioweapons threat, suggesting that creating replacement humans might be possible, that identity itself could be weaponized. Multiple storylines converged on China where final confrontation occurred. Chris and Leon and their respective partners working together, discovering that Carla Radames, scientist who had been transformed into Ada Wong's clone, was behind Neo Umbrella, seeking revenge against Derek Simmons, government official who had ordered her transformation. Simmons himself being infected and becoming powerful BOW. The incident ending with both primary antagonists dead, with C virus outbreak contained but with massive casualties, Tall Oaks destroyed, Lanxiang heavily damaged, thousands dead. Another demonstration that bioterror remained catastrophic threat despite decades of anti-bioterror work. Louisiana and the Baker Family, 2017. In 2017, the timeline shifted tone significantly with events in rural Louisiana. Ethan Winters, civilian with no connection to previous incidents, searching for his missing wife Mia, following lead to Baker family property outside Dulvey, Louisiana. Discovering the family had been infected by something called the mold, fungal organism that granted regenerative abilities, psychological control, and created various creatures, the mold being connected to Eveline. Bioorganic weapon created through different approach than viruses, using fungal infection and psychic connection rather than traditional viral transformation. Eveline appearing as young girl but actually being artificially created BOW, who infected the Baker family when her transport ship crashed nearby, using them as her family while slowly killing anyone else who came near. Ethan fought through the Baker property, encountering Jack Baker who couldn't be killed permanently due to mold regeneration, Marguerite Baker who controlled insect swarms, Lucas Baker who had been freed from mold control but continued serving Eveline voluntarily, discovering his wife Mia had been Eveline's handler, had been infected, had tried to prevent Eveline from reaching population centers. The entire incident being contained disaster. Small scale compared to previous outbreaks, but demonstrating that bioweapons development continued, that new approaches were being explored, that the mold represented different type of biological threat than viruses, fungal infection rather than viral, psychic control rather than physical transformation. Ethan eventually defeated Eveline with help from BSAA forces led by Chris Redfield, though discovering that the organization supporting this operation wasn't BSAA but Umbrella Corporation, reformed as Blue Umbrella, supposedly redemptive organization using Umbrella's name and resources to fight bioterror rather than create it. Chris working with them, though clearly conflicted about serving organization with Umbrella name, even if its stated purposes had inverted. The existence of Blue Umbrella suggesting that bioweapons knowledge was so valuable that even discredited names retained power, that Umbrella could be resurrected in new form despite everything. The original corporation had done. Village and the Megamycete, 2021. In 2021, Ethan and Mia and their infant daughter Rose attempted to live normal life following Louisiana incident, that attempt being shattered when Chris Redfield seemingly murdered Mia and kidnapped Rose. Ethan pursuing and discovering complex conspiracy involving Eastern European village. Ancient cult worshipping entity called the Megamycete. Miranda, the cult leader, attempting to resurrect her dead daughter using Rose's unique biology. Rose being valuable because she had been infected with mold in utero. Her body adapted to it, making her potentially key to Megamycete research or resurrection ritual. The village and its surrounding area had been infected with mold variant for centuries, the Megamycete being massive fungal colony underground. The root system of the mold, containing genetic memories of everyone who had been absorbed by it. Miranda having discovered it decades ago and used it to create various creatures and experiments, the four lords serving her being products of her research. Dimitrescu, vampire-like woman leading family of daughters, all created through mold infection. Beneviento, controlling dolls and hallucinations. Moreau, transformed into fish-like creature. Heisenberg, able to control metal and leading army of mechanically modified lichens, all of them being failed attempts by Miranda to create vessels suitable for her daughter's resurrection. Ethan fought through the village, defeating each lord, discovering that Mia, who had been killed, was actually Miranda in disguise. Real Mia being held prisoner. Chris having discovered the deception which explained his seemingly murderous actions. The truth being he was trying to eliminate Miranda before she could complete her ritual. Ethan eventually defeating Miranda in the Megamycete itself, sacrificing himself to destroy the fungal colony and save Rose. Chris escaping with Mia and Rose. Years later, Rose being shown as teenager with powers derived from her mold exposure. Being monitored and trained by organization, presumably set up for future incidents. Village demonstrated that bioweapons research had ancient roots in some cases, that the mold had existed for centuries, that modern bioweapons programs were sometimes discovering and weaponizing naturally occurring biological agents, rather than creating them entirely synthetically, that the line between natural and artificial biological threats was blurrier than it might seem, that humanity's hubris in weaponizing biology sometimes meant weaponizing things they didn't fully understand, couldn't completely control, shouldn't have disturbed. the current state, 2021 and beyond. As of 2021, the timeline's current endpoint in the mainline games, bioterrorism remains active threat. Organizations like BSAA continue operating. Individuals like Chris Redfield continue fighting. New biological threats continue emerging. The fundamental problems remain unsolved. Bioweapons. Technology continues proliferating. Knowledge continues spreading. Prevention remains largely impossible. Response remains primary strategy. Humanity, having created threats it cannot eliminate, can only manage, can only fight against repeatedly. The timeline potentially continuing indefinitely, as long as bioweapons knowledge exists, as long as individuals and organizations seek power through biological weapons, as long as the temptation to weaponize disease persists. The heroes have aged. Chris Redfield going from young STA-RES member in 1998 to grizzled veteran by 2021. Decades of fighting bioterror taking their toll. New generation beginning to emerge with Rose potentially representing future of anti-bioterror work. The fight being generational, passing from the mansion survivors to new heroes who face evolved threats, who carry forward the mission of preventing outbreaks, of responding to incidents, of fighting the impossible fight against biological weapons that cannot be uninvented. Rest now in the present. As this section concludes, as we reach the current end of the timeline, let the modern era settle over you like mold spreading through soil, understanding that decades after the mansion, after Raccoon City, after Umbrella's fall, the fundamental problems remain. Bioterrorism continues. New viruses and parasites and fungal threats emerge. Coordination between bioterror organizations increases. Scale of incidents varies from single-family home to entire cities. Responses improve, but never sufficiently. Heroes continue fighting despite knowing they cannot win permanently, can only win repeatedly, incident by incident. The timeline extending forward with no clear end point, no final victory. Just continued vigilance, continued sacrifice, continued response to biological threats that humanity created and cannot eliminate. Drift now through the 2010s and early 2020s, through RE6's global campaign, through Louisiana's swamps and mold-infected bakers, through Eastern European village and Miranda's megamycete, through decades of bioterror demonstrating that Umbrella's fall didn't end the age they began, just transformed it, decentralized it, made it harder to fight because there's no single organization to target, no single corporation to destroy. Just distributed network of bioterrorists, scattered remnants of research programs, black market viral samples, knowledge that cannot be forgotten, technology that cannot be uninvented, the permanent state of bioterror threat that characterizes Resident Evil's world from Raccoon City forward, that will characterize it indefinitely, that makes the timeline open-ended, continuing, never reaching final conclusion, because biological weapons cannot be eliminated, can only be fought against, repeatedly, continuously, by heroes who understand they are fighting endless war, who continue anyway, who deploy to outbreaks despite trauma, who risk infection despite fear, who sacrifice despite knowing their sacrifice won't end the threat, will only delay it, prevent this specific outbreak, save these specific people, make difference in this specific incident while understanding that more incidents are coming, that the timeline continues, that Resident Evil's world remains darkened by biological horror decades after Spencer discovered progenitor virus, decades after Umbrella was founded, decades after T-virus was created. The darkness spreading rather than receding. The threat growing rather than shrinking. The fight continuing through generations. Conclusion. The endless timeline, reflection and final rest. As we approach the end of this journey through Resident Evil's timeline, as sleep claims you completely, let us reflect on what we've witnessed, on the decades spanning from 1966 to 2021 and beyond. From Spencer's expedition finding progenitor virus to Rose's potential future fighting bioterror. From Umbrella's founding to its fall and reformation. From T-virus to G-virus to C-virus to Las Plagas to Ouroboros to the mold. From the mansion to Raccoon City to global outbreaks to village horror. The complete, sprawling, interconnected timeline that shows how weaponizing biology leads to cascading catastrophe. How corporate greed produces death on massive scale. How research without ethics creates monsters. How ambition without conscience destroys cities. The lessons written in bodies. The Resident Evil timeline teaches through horror, through showing rather than telling what happens when viruses become weapons, when corporations prioritize profit over human life, when researchers cross ethical boundaries, when governments cover up disasters, when bioweapons proliferate beyond control. The lessons being written in bodies of Raccoon City's 100,000 dead, in ruins of tall oaks, in mutated forms of researchers who experimented on themselves, in trauma of survivors who witnessed apocalypse, in decades of outbreaks that continue despite every attempt at prevention. The fundamental lesson being that humanity cannot control what it creates, that weaponizing disease leads inevitably to catastrophe, that biological weapons threaten their creators as certainly as their intended targets, that Pandora's box cannot be closed once opened, that knowledge cannot be forgotten, that fighting bioterror is endless struggle rather than problem with solution. The heroes of this timeline, Chris and Jill and Leon and Claire and others, have fought for decades, have prevented countless deaths, have stopped worst outcomes repeatedly, but they haven't stopped bioterror, haven't eliminated the threat, haven't prevented all outbreaks, can only respond, react, minimize casualties, save who they can while accepting that they cannot save everyone, cannot prevent everything, the heroism being in continuing despite impossibility of ultimate victory, in deploying to outbreaks despite fear, in risking infection despite trauma, in fighting because fighting is necessary even when winning is impossible, in making difference where difference can be made while accepting limits of what any individual or organization can achieve against threats as fundamental as weaponized disease. The corporations behind the horror umbrella corporation, Neo Umbrella, Los Illuminados, various terrorist organizations and rogue nations and black market weapons dealers, all pursuing bioweapons for different reasons, profit or ideology or revenge or power, but all creating same results, outbreaks that kill indiscriminately, monsters that escape control, viruses that spread beyond containment, the corporate and organizational structures behind bioterror being as varied as their motivations, but the outcome being consistent. Death, destruction, transformation of humans into creatures, collapse of cities, trauma for survivors, the timeline demonstrating that whether bioweapons are developed by pharmaceutical corporations or religious cults or government programs or terrorist networks, the results are the same. The horror is equivalent. The threat is equal. suggesting that the problem isn't specific organizations but rather the knowledge itself, the capability to weaponize biology, the temptation to pursue power through disease. Spencer's vision of human evolution through viral enhancement led to Raccoon City's destruction. Wesker's megalomania seeking godhood led to African disaster. Miranda's grief-seeking resurrection led to village horror. Different motivations producing similar outcomes, proving that intent matters less than capability, that weaponizing biology for any reason leads to catastrophe, that the road to bioterror is paved with various intentions but leads always to same destination: death for victims, trauma for survivors, horror for witnesses, continuation of cycle as knowledge spreads, as others pursue similar paths, as bioweapons proliferate because humans cannot resist weaponizing anything they discover, cannot help pursuing power even when pursuit threatens everyone, including themselves. The survivors and their burden. The survivors of Resident Evil's timeline carry impossible burden, knowing what they know, having seen what they've seen, understanding that prevention is largely impossible, that their fight never ends, that more outbreaks are coming, that they can save some people but not all people, can stop some incidents but not all incidents. Chris Redfield aging from young cop to grizzled veteran across decades of anti-bioterror work, Leon Kennedy transforming from rookie to government agent through years of deployments, Jill Valentine carrying trauma of Nemesis and Mansion and countless other incidents, Claire Redfield searching for her brother and finding Apocalypse, Rebecca Chambers entering the timeline as teenager and emerging as experienced bioweapons expert, all of them shaped by what they experienced, changed by what they witnessed, damaged by what they survived, but continuing anyway. Continuing because someone must. Because if those who understand the threat don't fight it, who will? The psychological cost of living in Resident Evil's world, of knowing that zombies are real, that viruses can weaponize, that outbreaks occur regularly, that civilization's protections are fragile, that cities can fall, must be immense, incomprehensible. The survivors functioning despite trauma, deploying despite PTSD, fighting despite depression, continuing because the alternative is surrender, is allowing bioterrorists to operate unopposed, is accepting that outbreaks will kill everyone rather than most people, is giving up, and the heroes don't give up, continue fighting decades after their first encounters with bio-horror, continue deploying into situations that could kill them, continue sacrificing normalcy and relationships and mental health to fight bioterror. Their persistence being the only reason the Resident Evil timeline doesn't end in complete apocalypse, doesn't culminate in global pandemic, doesn't result in extinction, the heroes preventing worst outcomes repeatedly, even though they cannot prevent all bad outcomes. The open-ended future. The timeline continues beyond 2021, beyond Village, into uncertain future where Rose might become New Generation's hero, where Chris continues fighting despite age, where bioterrorism evolves and adapts, where new viruses emerge, where old threats return, where the fundamental problems remain unsolved, the timeline being open-ended by nature because biological weapons cannot be eliminated. Knowledge cannot be erased. Capability cannot be removed once established. Humanity having transformed itself into species that can weaponize disease and therefore must live forever with consequences of that capability, must fight perpetually against threats it created, must accept that bioterror is a permanent feature of its world. Future games will continue the timeline, will introduce new viruses and parasites, new organizations and antagonists, new heroes and survivors, new cities and villages and locations experiencing outbreaks, the formula being established, being repeatable, being sustainable as long as players want to experience biohorror. As long as the premise of weaponized disease-creating monsters remains compelling, as long as Resident Evil continues exploring implications of biological weapons, the timeline potentially extending indefinitely, moving forward through decades or centuries, perhaps eventually reaching point where humanity either eliminates bioweapons capability through some dramatic transformation of society or succumbs to global pandemic, but more likely continuing indefinitely in current state, outbreaks occurring, heroes responding, damage being contained, lessons being learned, but fundamental problems persisting, timeline continuing, story never ending, just pausing, just waiting for next incident, next game, next chapter in decades-long saga of humanity fighting biological threats it created, cannot eliminate, can only manage through constant vigilance, constant sacrifice, constant struggle. Complete understanding and deep rest. You've journeyed through the entire Resident Evil timeline now, from progenitor discovery in 1966 through Village in 2021 and beyond, understanding the foundation Spencer laid, the viruses that were created, the outbreaks that occurred, the cities that fell, the heroes who fought, the corporations that profited, the cycles that perpetuate, the impossible fight against weaponized disease, the timeline showing decades of bioterror, decades of response, decades of horror and heroism, both, the complete story from beginning to present to uncertain future. Comprehensive understanding of how Resident Evil's world became what it is, why bioterror persists, what fighting it costs, why prevention is impossible, why heroes continue despite impossibility. And now, with understanding complete, with the timeline fully explored, with every major incident covered and connected, you can rest, can sleep deeply, can let the narrative fade into dreams, knowing you have witnessed the complete saga, understanding Resident Evil's timeline from end to end, from origin to present, from foundation to current state, the story told, the knowledge transferred, the timeline mapped completely, and you can sleep knowing that Resident Evil's horror is fiction, that progenitor virus doesn't exist, that T-virus isn't real, that the mold is imaginary, that Raccoon City never fell because Raccoon City never existed, that zombies aren't walking, that bioweapons are regulated and limited and not threatening you, that you're safe, that this timeline is entertainment, that the decades of horror we've explored tonight exist only in games and fiction, only in stories, only in this timeline that exists to explore dark possibility, to ask what if weaponizing disease became normal, what if corporations had no limits, what if bioterror became a standard threat, creating a world of horror that's compelling precisely because it's not real, not possible, not threatening you personally. Sleep deeply in complete safety. Rest now, completely, finally, the timeline explored fully, your understanding complete, the story told from beginning to present. Nothing left except sleep, deep and peaceful, far from progenitor and T-virus and G-virus and all the biological weapons, far from Umbrella and Neo-Umbrella and Los Illuminados and all the organizations, far from Mansion and Raccoon City and Village and all the locations, far from Spencer and Wesker and Miranda and all the antagonists, far from zombies and tyrants and BOWs and all the creatures, safe in world where Resident Evil is fiction, where bioterror exists only in games, where the timeline we've explored is entertainment, where you can sleep without vigilance, without fear, without any awareness except comfort and safety, and the peaceful darkness of deep sleep. The Resident Evil timeline spans decades, covers continents, includes countless incidents, but it's contained safely in fiction, in games, in stories, never threatening you, never touching you, existing only for exploration, for entertainment, for tonight's journey through biohorror that's completed now, finished, done, leaving only rest, only sleep, only peace, far from outbreaks and infections and transformations, far from all the horror that makes Resident Evil compelling as fiction but terrifying as reality. And reality is you're safe, you're protected, you're far from biological weapons, far from viral outbreaks, far from corporate conspiracies, far from all the threats we've explored tonight, able to sleep deeply, knowing that the Resident Evil timeline exists only in games, only in fiction, only in this script that's guided you through decades of biohorror while facilitating sleep, while calming rather than disturbing, while exploring darkness from absolute safety, from comfortable distance, from the security of knowing that none of it is real, that you're safe, that sleep is possible, that rest is deserved. Final gratitude and release. Thank you for journeying through this timeline, through decades of Resident Evil's biohorror, through the complete story from progenitor discovery to village and beyond, through outbreaks and responses, through corporate crimes and heroic struggles, through the entire sprawling narrative that defines Resident Evil's world, and thank you for allowing this exploration to guide you towards sleep, to facilitate rest through gentle pacing and comprehensive coverage and calming tone despite dark subject matter. The script designed to inform and soothe simultaneously, to explore timeline while encouraging rest, to tell complete story while facilitating sleep, succeeding if you're now drifting into dreams, if consciousness is fading, if sleep is claiming you completely. The Resident Evil timeline continues in games, in future installments, in stories yet to be told, but your exploration is complete, your understanding is sufficient. Your journey through decades of biohorror is finished, leaving only sleep, only rest, only the comfortable knowledge that you understand the timeline fully, that you have witnessed the complete saga, that you can rest, having explored every major incident, every significant development, every key character and organization and virus, the complete picture assembled, the timeline mapped, the story told, and now you can simply sleep, deeply and peacefully and completely, far from zombies and viruses and outbreaks, far from all the biological horror that makes Resident Evil fascinating as fiction but would be nightmare as reality. Safe in your world where bioterror is regulated, where Umbrella doesn't exist, where T-virus isn't real, where cities don't fall to outbreaks, where you can sleep safely, where rest is possible without fear, where the timeline we've explored remains safely contained in fiction, in games, in entertainment. Never threatening you, never touching you, just stories, just horror for exploration, just timeline for understanding, complete now, finished, allowing final rest. Good night, listener. Sleep deeply through the comfortable darkness, through dreams that hopefully contain no zombies, no viruses, no outbreaks, No biological horror. Just peaceful rest in world where Resident Evil is fiction, where you're safe, where decades of bioterror timeline exist only in games, where you've explored complete story from 1966 to 2021 and beyond, understanding the foundation, the incidents, the responses, the continuation, the entire sprawling saga. And now you can rest, having witnessed it all, having understood it completely, able to sleep, knowing the timeline is told, the story is complete, the exploration is finished, leaving only rest, only peace, only the deep, comfortable sleep that you've earned through this long journey, through decades of timeline, through comprehensive exploration of Resident Evil's world, all of it now fading, all of it releasing you toward sleep, toward dreams, toward rest that's deep and complete and peaceful, far from horror, far from outbreaks, far from all the biological nightmares that the timeline contains, safe in reality where none of it threatens you, where you can sleep without fear, where the Resident Evil timeline is entertainment, is fiction, is safely contained in games and stories, never crossing into your world, never affecting your life, never disturbing your sleep except as tonight's gentle exploration that's guided you through darkness while facilitating rest. That's told decades of timeline while encouraging sleep. That's been comprehensive while remaining calming. Complete exploration designed for rest. Finished now, releasing you to sleep, to peaceful dreams, to final deep rest. Sleep well. The timeline is complete. You're safe. Good night.